So hi everyone. Today I'm here with Mark McElvanney, who's the Director of Sales at IEHub. Hey Mark, nice to see you. So
Hi.
Thanks very much for joining us today. So we just want to have a bit of a chat, and I suppose it's interesting just finding out a little bit about your experience over the last 6 months or so. I mean, it's been a crazy kind of time, a lot of change, but it'd be good to hear what you've been seeing, really.
Yeah, I think with IEHub, because we have different touch points, so we have client contact and direct customer contact. We very much reflect what's gone on kind of in the wider world, or the world of collections, I suppose, in terms of COVID. Seen some changes both in terms of customer contacts and the types of contact that have come through, and certainly the pandemic, because it's driven the industry to accelerate its digital contacts. We've kind of been part and parcel of that for lots of different firms across different sectors, now all signing up and joining the IEHub community.
And are you finding different sectors where maybe they weren't before? Is the sector mix changing?
I think for us it's kind of hard to say in terms of the mix. We are still relatively new as a company, and we work very broadly across lots of different sectors. So during the pandemic, we've started to work with a bank, a local authority, a collection agent, a utility provider. So in terms of sectors, we're not seeing any specific focus, but indeed the reach is very broad, and I think it is probably just again a reflection of the pandemic, and that it is hitting everybody across society and every area, whether it's financial services, utilities, local authorities, housing associations. They're all feeling it in very much the same way because of the impact that it's having on their customers and all of us as a community.
And I suppose the pandemic's kind of hit in several ways, is from your perspective. One of which is, just the ability to be able to service customers and that sort of like move toward digital. But the other thing is then that whole piece around affordability, right, as well, which is, but you have to try and make an assessment. You have to try and understand what's affordable versus what's not. And, that's another way that will start coming through, because people are more stressed, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably been one of the biggest changes for us with the pandemic is maybe the reason why organisations join up with IEHub. Pre-pandemic, we were probably very much a typical collections tool, used to assess customer affordability, and the drop out of that would then be forbearance and financial vulnerability. But collections was that specific driver. With the pandemic, obviously the focus has changed. And lots of organisations are looking at forbearance first and foremost. There's obviously been various guidance from the different regulators and encouraging that and setting that in different ways. But what that's meant is the use of IEHub has become kind of that sort of sharp edge for the affordability assessment, particularly within financial services, where the FCA prescribed payment deferrals or payment holidays have come to an end. IEHub's been used to look at that customer's financial position, so moving from that blanket approach into the tailored approach and an IEHub affordability assessment, then being shared with the creditor. They can see specifically what does that customer need. Do they need a continued payment holiday, or do they need some alternative forbearance? Is there a middle ground? Because ultimately the longer the payment deferral goes on for, effectively the bigger and steeper the hill it is for the customer to climb at the end if they ought to recover the account. But certainly that's been a specific change within financial services. And similarly with the water companies as well, they've obviously all had social tariffs for a long time, but IEHub's been used in that position more with those organisations as well, and just identifying where affordability meets the particular water company's social tariff criteria.
Yeah, so I suppose so income and expenditure has been an issue for a long time, certainly in financial services, but just more generally. And I mean, it's because it just takes so much time, and I think, have you seen sort of like changes in terms of the adoption of that, changing across I suppose different industries? How's the solution been kind of welcomed, really?
it's coming in different stages for different organisations. I think when we look at financial services and probably my background kind of going back many years, the introduction of income and expenditure was really pushed by the FCA as part of regulation. So there are some quite mature processes within financial services, and for some of those bigger organisations, it's well established. Where we started to fit in, particularly with some of the more challenger banks coming through, where their affordability assessment maybe isn't as mature, or their understanding of the collections process. So we've had some success there. And then other industries where their regulator maybe hasn't been as prescriptive in terms of affordability. So particularly within water, housing, and local authority, they've all had an affordability assessment of some kind. Maybe that's been something they've developed themselves, or they've cribbed bits from other industries. But because there isn't a consistent or mature approach, IEHub's been able to come in and particularly sort of the last year or so with the introduction of the standard financial statement and that going across multiple industries, again, that's helped us in our approach and having that consistent income and expenditure assessment that not only works with the maturer processes within financial services, but across all of the other industries that I've mentioned. And ultimately, from a customer point of view, there's a benefit that they can engage as widely as they need to.
What about open banking? There's been a lot of discussion around open banking. So, I mean, where do you kind of feel that kind of fits in? And what have you seen a change in that? Particularly in terms of, I mean, there's been quite a lot of discussion around it, I think, sort of during the lockdown and during the pandemic. But what kind of things have you heard?
I think from an open banking perspective, there's sort of two things that have influenced us. Obviously, broadly, UK consumers are becoming more digitally aware, and we are seeing widely an increase in the use of open banking. So I think sort of some of the last numbers that's hitting around the 2 million mark. There's obviously still a long way to go before open banking is commonplace, but we've seen that reflected in our open banking use within IEHub. So a customer can log in and effectively populate their INE using open banking. So we've seen a steady increase. The other factor which influences kind of our INE use is the different partners that we work with. So if a partner is particularly open banking focused themselves, or just has a more technology aware customer base, then we find that creates a boost in our open banking use. So over the course of probably the last 10 months, we've gone from sort of a few percent of our customer base using open banking to populate their INE to around 23% we are currently. So that customer will log in and they'll have an INE within sort of 5 minutes ready to deliver to their creditors.
And how much does the open banking take off the time to fill out the INE? So I remember over the phone, right, an INE would typically take between 20 and 40 minutes, depending on I suppose the product and the depth and those kind of things. I mean, that's why there's a big push to online. So, how much does open banking save in terms of completing an IE for the customer?
From a customer's perspective, it's probably going to save them 15-20 minutes, dependent on kind of their level of awareness and ability at the offset. But I mean, I'm an advocate of open banking. I use it myself within IEHub, and that makes the completion of the budget, it's just so much quicker. The data comes in, and as a user, I can just screen my transactions, make sure I'm happy with how IEHub's categorised them against the SFS, and ultimately that's the budget populated and it's ready to go. And it is literally a few minutes to log into the online banking portal. The data's populated in seconds and it's ready to go.
I mean, there's always quite a lot of resistance, I suppose, from INE and collections in terms of whether people really want to do that. I mean, to get 23% is pretty impressive. And do you see, is that different by industry, or is that different by maybe that type of customers? So customers are in maybe more in arrears versus those are the less in arrears. And do you see any kind of splits within that, or?
So we don't see the customer's details specifically within IEHub. It's very much customer owned data. What we can see is difference in open banking access dependent on specific organisations. So we said one of our partners that we work with within financial services, so they're a digital bank. Their customers are therefore far more digitally savvy. Their open banking usage is far above our average. We then look at maybe another organisation, considering local authority, council tax collection. Their customer base is going to be more broad. They're not particularly picking their customers. Those that end up in collections, some of them are using open banking, but they are far below the average that we see within IEHub.
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, we've all had to become much more digitally savvy over the last 6 months, right? And almost like that in itself will drive up open banking usage, as well as like online I&E usage, all sorts of things, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, and I suppose it's not sort of a customer exclusive piece where we see customer queries coming through, and customers manage a lot of the contact themselves. We've got all the FAQs there, but we do get customers looking for support, and the demographic of those customers, just when we're having the individual conversations, they are very broad. So we can't say sort of if you're over a certain age, then you don't use open banking. We're getting questions about how to access this, what's the right way to share it, from sort of all walks of life and all age groups.
Yeah, I mean that's really a myth. I mean, in terms of like who's more digital savvy and which demographics more digital savvy, is almost like I think there's some myths that have almost like been broken during the whole of lockdown. It's you know, some of the preconceptions we had before really have just proven to not be true. Really, I mean, largely so it feels like, at least anyway, and like everyone's now doing it.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the pandemic, it's made people question their own preferences. So I think people have had habits rather than a preference, and it might have been, well, I go into my branch and I like to bank face to face, and the pandemic stopped that and forced people to go down another channel. But actually, once they've got there and they've broken away from that habit, they've actually been able to see two sides of a customer journey and actually form, I suppose, a true preference rather than just this is what I've always done.
Yeah, I like that. That's we always talk about like customer preferences, but actually they are customer habits.
Yeah.
I really like that. It's good.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is just around how people are influenced. So if you think about collections, we might always say, well, collections journeys, the preference is telephone contact, but actually it's probably been the exclusive contact channel for such a long time. And now that there's multiple channels, we're not just talking about telephone or digital splits off into different aspects. There's web chat, you can use email, there's different web portals, and actually giving people a true choice, we'll get a better reflection of what preference is. And I suppose as organisations, we need to be as broad in those offerings as we possibly can and let the customer make the choice for themselves.
Sharing. What about data sharing? So that was always a bit of a resistance around sharing data across multiple organisations. I mean, over the longest time, and that sort of like stalled efforts around, you know, I&E sort of historically, at least anyway. It sounds like that's improving quite a bit, and certainly into new sectors. But how do you feel that kind of journey is coming on? Because it makes a load of logical sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly getting better, and the more organisations we work with, kind of the less of the compliance, data protection type barriers that we're coming up against. Obviously, GDPR is a factor within that, and through IEHub, the customer owns and manages and controls their data, and they're given consent every time they share their information out. So that's kind of one of the big keys, that they can have it and hold it, and it's kind of theirs to do as they wish. In terms of the data coming back the other way, I think we were really pleased to see the FCA encouraging data sharing for firms that have the capability, and if not, any organisation who's part of IEHub, as well as having a customer portal. We have a creditor portal, so the information can go back the other way. So if a creditor invests in completing an I&E, they can share it back with their customer, and the customer's then got something which they can share with the next creditor. And really, that's one of the big drivers in terms of what IEHub wants to do, is make life easier for that customer, give them their I&E, and let them engage with each of their creditors. So, and typically, UK consumers got 6 unsecured debts, and each of those creditors will have an I&E process of some form, and it's I suppose the repetition of that I&E engagement that we want to try and break down. And the fact that customers got their own I&E, they can just deliver it to each of those creditors. Yes, they still have to have a level of engagement, but that engagement isn't at the level of the kind of the mundane or the intrusive, how much do you spend on X? It's all being presented as a single I&E goes out, and the creditor can have a much more concise, informed conversation with the customer and ultimately spend their call time on getting to that customer outcome and not having to interrogate I&E data.
Yeah, you don't have the bright light in front of them, sort of like you can have more of a helpful conversation around
it's
how can you help them out.
You I always think about it's the mastermind chair when you've got the customer on the phone. Okay, the question one, what do you earn? Okay, what do you spend when you go to the supermarket? You take all that away and putting it into a customer-led digital journey. I can fill an I&E in at my own time. If I do that manually, or whether I use open banking, but it's in my gift. I can put the kids to bed, do whatever I need to do, focus a bit of time into the I&E, send it to the creditor, and then when I'm having a conversation with all those different lenders, it's kind of that legwork's done, and it's very much you can see what I can afford, and this is the arrangement that we're going to agree, or the forbearance which I might need on that particular account at that time.
So we talked a bit about as a data sharing and I suppose I&E and forbearance. How do you guys kind of fit in with the new breathing space regulations that are coming out, like sort of like the start of next year? I mean, what's going to be the interaction between that, I suppose, and the free debt advice sector, etc.? I mean, how do you see all that kind of working? Because that's potentially a fairly big change that could kind of happen in terms of dynamics.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're sort of still waiting to see some of the detail from the insolvency service, but IEHub want to play an active part in that. Prior to IEHub, my background is within debt advice, so kind of understanding some of the customer challenges as well as the debt advisor challenges. And what we've been really keen to do is use IEHub not just to link customers to creditors, but link customers to debt advisors and debt advisors to customers. We give use of our kit to any free debt advice provider completely for free. And what we can then enable the customer to do, or the client as they would become, is share their I&E information with a debt advisor, so we can make the debt advisor's job easier. The debt advisor can kind of do their particular role, and they can share their I&E back with the customer, so the customer's got a record of that advice conversation. The debt advisor can manage the debt solution for them. But what we're then going to of our development roadmap for probably end of this year and early into next year is look to see how do we track that journey. So what we want to do is then be able to acknowledge within an I&E that a debt advisor's completed the I&E with the customer. The customer's got a debt advisor approved I&E, and they can then share that with a creditor. And within the IEHub journey, we'll show the creditor that the I&E was completed by a debt advisor. So the creditor's then got something which they can use to apply some breathing space. But that's just a single view or something that can map into the insolvency service piece we're yet to define, but the opportunity is there, and certainly just giving the debt advice provider the recognition they've done the work and carrying that through to the creditor gives the creditor some confidence as well.
I quite like the idea of almost like transparency across the process. So you have sort of like the customers entering the the I&E data, and everyone can see different spots in terms of like where everyone can see in different spots where the information, what information is being put in, where they currently sit within the journey, those kind of things. And that sort of transparency from a customer point of view, as much as from each of the businesses or the the creditor's point of view, it seems quite interesting. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, kind of one of the things that I want to try and get across within IEHub is that there aren't winners and losers, or they don't have to be winners and losers. If we have that transparency, ultimately the best thing for the customer is the best thing for the creditor. Creditors can get paid or apply the forbearance where they need to, and ultimately retain a customer and have account which eventually recovers. Situations aren't fantastic for everybody. There'll be some short-term support which is needed. Others might be more long-term, but ultimately having that transparency, everybody knows exactly where they are.
Yeah, it's trying to get a win-win out of what is a difficult situation for everyone, really, isn't it? Yeah, really. Yeah. Okay, I mean, so what do you think the future holds? So we've just gone back into another lockdown in England, at least anyway. It seems like cases are rising in Europe. I mean, what do you think is going to be the next 6 months?
If only I had the crystal ball. I think for me, the worry with where we are is potentially where we just continue to kick the can down the road. I think the offer of forbearance there for customers is absolutely fantastic, and the industry's doing a great job in kind of meeting those challenges and being in the right place for the customer. I think the longer we go on with a blanket, the one size fits all forbearance, essentially the bigger problem we're storing up for tomorrow. Certainly a more tailored approach means that the halfway house can be found for some of those customers if they are able to repay some of their debt for the next 3 or 6 months. Actually, at the end of that period, the hill that they've got to climb isn't going to be so big. So that is kind of one of my worries. If lockdown gets extended, it'll be the extended forbearance. I think that the problem is getting bigger the longer we go on, and there needs to be some bite point. I know for some customers and for businesses as well, that isn't going to be an easy situation. But I think if we can realise some of those sooner rather than later, then the problem might not be so much to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels from the conversations I've been having is every single lockdown sort of concentrated the population. So people went on payment holidays, and then some people rolled over, some people didn't. And every single time we go, that population gets smaller. But for those people who need it, the problem gets kicked down the road further, and then it can become worse, right? And I suppose the question is, I mean, even using like we're chatting about with you guys, is how do you get that information and help those people today, rather than waiting for it to become sort of another 6 months down the road, right? Because some people are okay, but some people are really sort of struggling.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's lots going on out there. There's lots of forbearance, lots of different options. There's lots of goodwill. I think the piece that we need to then try and overcome, whether it's at the front end of a payment deferral or at the end, is how do we get those customers to engage and effectively self-diagnose to a certain extent and look to see, well, actually the forbearance that we're putting in, is it the right forbearance, or is there a point where we need to have almost a moment of truth, whether it's from a mortgage lender's perspective, see ultimately the long-term prospect isn't good, and actually it's better to have a effectively a controlled or managed exit, where the outcomes are then more favourable again for everybody.
Yeah, it's trying to get that win-win, the best you possibly can. The best outcomes for everyone, I suppose, is really if you can get to it, right? So
yeah, it's a hard concept, I suppose, to consider if you're a customer, and if it does come to a repossession or something of that nature, it's really hard to look at that as a win. But actually, if you compare it to what the alternatives might be, and you could be in a property struggling for the next 12 months, worrying about your mortgage, or do you kind of exit now, get something which is more affordable, and you've saved yourself all of that stress and anxiety for the next year. It's a difficult concept, but actually for some people that might be the right way to go about it.
And I suppose that's where the debt advice sector really kind of helps people, right? Sort of talk through some of those issues and sort of coaches people through, right? Well, Mark, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great to get a bit of insight into your world, the world of I&E, and everything that's been going on. Because I think digital's been such a hot topic, and it's great to find out a little bit more about how you can gradually basically see it starting marching across the industry, right? And it's really being adopted. So really appreciate your insight very much. So thank you very much.
Cool. No, thank you, Chris.